name is Steve Williams. I'm a volunteer with the Eastside Heritage Center and also on the board of the Newcastle Historical Society. Bob Boyd, our surveyor, who's been working on the cemetery, is here somewhere. And also Russ Segner, the president of Newcastle Historical, and Mike Entel-Crawford, the head of the collections. And we have Sally Lawrence and Dave Kapler here from St. Louis Creek. And I think I saw Janice on from the Welcome Council. Here we are. So thank you all for coming. On a day like this, I guess it's nice to be inside looking at history and learning about things where we live. And that's the exciting part of all this. This is Eastside coal mining on the east side of Lake Washington, basically under Cougar Mountain, starting in Coal Creek area, Old Newcastle, and working its way on up and across the mountain. The same coal seams show up in Issaquah, but there's a break in between. The ownership was different, and the two companies didn't want anybody else getting at it there. So, let's see if I can figure out how to work all this equipment. In 1852, the first white settlers arrived in Seattle at Alpine Point. In 1859, Philip H. Lewis hired a Native American guide to take a canoe trip up Lake Washington to the mouth of a creek right here near the portage route between the two lakes. And he noticed chunks of black rock in the mouth, in the discharge area of that creek. So right there on the shoreline, you knew there was coal in the hills up here. And he went back to Seattle and talked the city fathers into petitioning the government to do a formal USGS survey of the east side of the lake. In 1863, Elliot Richardson led that group. Phil Lewis was part of the crew that went out and staked section quarters on the east side. In working up the stream beds, they encountered 8 bands of stone coal in the side banks of the creek. The erosion had caused a landslide and exposed the bank. And now above the water, we have gray sandstone and about a 3-foot thick band of coal, and then orange stained sandstone because there's a lot of iron mineral in our land up here. USGS actually found 11 bands of coal here, all of them tilted down into the earth to the north at about a 40-degree angle. And 4 of them were thick enough to warrant extensive coal mining. So the number 4, the number 3, the Bagley, and the Muldoon were mined extensively. Each one of these little circles represents a tunnel going through the coal seam on a level east and west. If you could go straight down in, it would look like a layer cake. And you have massive layers of sandstone, 25 feet thick, 111 feet thick, and then all of a sudden here's an 8-foot thick band of coal for the number 4 seam, 17 feet for the number 3, 25 feet for the Bagley, and again about 14 feet for the Muldoon. You notice some of these areas had coal, but it was considered dirty. It was mixed in with seashell fossils and sandstone and petrified wood, so they figured it was too small or too dirty to be worth mining. They did find saltwater seashells mixed in with the coal, and that told us that the land we're on now was under the Pacific Ocean, or at least a bay or inlet of the Pacific Ocean. And that time, we're talking 30 million years ago, the edge of the Pacific Ocean was over where Spokane is today. Mark Pistrang was a geologist for USGS and also a hike leader and volunteer for the Trail Club. He made this diagram for a book, Bedrock and Boot Soles, and it's very interesting. Here you see Lake Sammamish and Lake Washington. Here's I-90 going across. Here's a deposit. And it matches what they call the Blakely deposit, which is known for fossils, those saltwater fossils. Horizontal banding, it returns to the Brent Formation. And here we've got good bands of coal laid down in the bottom of a swamp or lake millions of years ago. And the timeline he has here is very interesting. It starts up here, 5 million years ago is when geologists tell us Mount Rainier got started building. Only 5 million years ago. And you notice there's 20 billion years of uplift. So the ocean plate is diving under the continental plate and rumbling it. Just like if you scuffed your throw rug in the hallway, it would bunch up and rise up in the center. That's what happened here. Cougar Mountain is a fold in those flat layer cake seams caused by plate tectonics. And it's 30 million years of time, 35 million years for that to happen. The glacial age was up here about 12,000 to 18,000 years ago. So recent history, and of course, we've only been around for a couple hundred years, even in the United States. Although the native population, of course, has been here much longer. So we're talking about stored sunshine, stored energy in the earth, plant material that was trapped underwater and then covered by big streams of mud and sand that kept the oxygen out and compressed it and caused it to heat up. And that carbonized it. It turned into a rock that will burn. So the miners, when they found it, they went up the bank just far enough to be high and dry, and then started working their way down that coast. And everything they picked loose, they put in gunny sacks, put it on horses, went to the shoreline, put it in Indian canoes, paddled across to Leschi, and again in wagons to downtown Seattle. But it was all handwork like this. And the candles were stuck in the wall with a metal spike called a sticking Tommy. There's one on the table over here. Those were used in Europe for centuries in the salt mines and coal mines back over there. Underground now, we get a gangway, a straight tunnel on horizontal, and you notice the timbering is rough, raw logs, not from a sawmill. And the men all have open flame headlamps on their heads. So these are whale oil lamps with a wick, and there's an open flame on your head while you're mining underground. That's your lighting. Your muscle to move the car are mules. They were using mules underground to pull the cars. In fact, the mule lead mule here had his own whale oil lamp. But after a few months, he probably didn't need it. It was said that the wheels were stable underground for months at a time, sometimes years at a time. They might even go blind, but they still knew exactly where they were. They memorized the sounds and smells and feelings of where they were in the tunnels underground. And so the company put a very high value on the mules, even more than the men. You could always find a guy willing to work. The mules were hard to train and farm. So they were valuable. 20 years of time from 1863, that discovery of coal, to now 1894. And wow, look at the area right at Coal Creek. A mile down the road here, where the big horseshoe bend starts across the creek. This was number 3 mine right there. You notice they got 3 smokestacks for boilers to heat the coal, create steam. Steam engines ran all of the equipment. The ropeway came out with cables to slanted one right here that went into the mine. So the mine was in the side bank of the creek. And you notice the company store and the sawmill are over here with its own rail and trussing arrangement. The rails on this side of the narrow gauge rails, 3 foot apart, for the little coal cars. Once they're loaded, they come back on this line to the bumpers to be sorted. And here's a great sketch by Edward Lang, probably used as advertising for funding in California and Chicago and New York. We didn't have very much money out here. We couldn't afford to build stuff this big or hire that many people, so we needed outside funding. But now Coal Creek, you've got this huge industrial operation going on. And over at Old Newcastle, at the other end of the golf course today, was the town of Newcastle, the original town of Newcastle, right there. And here's a picture of it a little later on. You notice a white church on top of the hill, 2-story white buildings, probably for mine superintendents and supervisors. And right in the middle of town, here's a huge pile of smoking coal. As it's exposed to the outside air, it starts to break down and often will catch fire if the pile is too big, too thick, too heavy. So this could be waste rock. My guess is it was fresh coal waiting to be loaded on the cars and sent to Seattle. And you notice the streets are dirt, the main traffic is horses, and so you have wooden boardwalks to get around town. Here's a Newcastle crew with their picks and lunch pails and headlamps. And here's our trusty mule to haul the coal. The gentleman in the foreground with the tie and the children we think is probably the school teacher. And you notice narrow gauge rails for the cars, just 3 feet of height. Underground, when the coal is first exposed, it's clean and bright and shiny like this, and we have a layer of mudstone underneath and orange stained sandstone above. You can see the coal is going up at an angle away from the gangway, which is on a horizontal level here. There's also a wooden chute, so any coal that's picked away up above slides down the chute and fills the car down here. It was a room and pillar variety of coal mining. You have to imagine all of this being slanted up 40 degrees, but basically where they found the coal, they would dig a main slope down 200 feet and then go sideways and create a tunnel or a drift. They called it a water level drift because it was tilted so the water would drain out from one end. And then every 50 feet they would go back up and create a chute, a narrow channel. And if the roof was solid enough, they could widen it out and create a room. And all of that coal that was picked loose would slide down the slope on the 40-degree angle into the waiting coal car below. It was very important to also have airways, usually on both sides, so that air could circulate. The hot air in the mine down underground wants to rise, but it needs help. And so they had a fan at the top. In the very early days, that would be cranked by a very young boy, maybe 10 years old. Then it went to steam engines to do the same thing, and eventually to electric fans much later on. But the air has to go in the main slope and through the rooms, and then they had counters and crosscuts so that the air would circulate between the rooms. And another job for a young boy was to be a stopper, or to have canvas lattices to close off any of the tunnels where they weren't working. And that way the air was concentrated right where the miners needed it. Here's a crew of Finnish miners, young Finnish guys, 1890 in the tools of the trade. They all had canteens and lunch pails, shovels, and pickaxes, and again, the pale oil lamps on their heads. Interesting, 4 out of the 6 are smoking pipes. I guess nicotine got you up in the morning and ready to go. We had 14 different nationalities out here. Most of our miners came from Europe or the East Coast because they had mining families, they knew the equipment, they knew the work and the procedures, and they wanted to come out here to a new land, a new industry where they could make money and establish a homestead in the United States. Our biggest problem was how do we get the coal from Newcastle Coal Creek on into Seattle in the docks, because we were selling our coal to San Francisco. They had money from the 49 gold rush, but they'd run out of coal from Mount Diablo. And so initially it was gunny sacks, horses to the lakefront, and Indian canoes across to Leshai, and then wagons over the hump. Then they went out the south end of the lake in scows on the Black River and connected to the Duwamish River and went on up that way. And then the third technique was barges that went north of the lake, up and over the hump there. There wasn't a ship canal yet or a cut. They had to tram over the top on wagons and then load up more barges to get down Lake Union and then load up again and go through Seattle to the docks. So the coal was handled 11 different times. That was expensive. And finally they knew they needed to get a railroad all the way out. The renting part was easy because the Duwamish flats were fairly level. But then they had to climb that hill where Sunset is today and get across the big canyon of Bay Creek. One interesting thing that happened was this incline. When the mule had pulled the cart, the tram, the wagon pulled by a horse or a mule, that's called a tram, to this area, which is about 200 feet above Lake Washington. 405 today would be right about here. So it needed this long rail line down to the water to get to the barges. And they had a cable and winch system to do that. And then the barges would take it on up to where the UW is. Later they got steam locomotives like this. Again, using coal as fuel to heat water, create steam, and drive the engines. Here's a cylinder at the bottom. And you notice a great big carbide head back at the top for burning early in the morning and late at night. And a funnel stack, also with another funnel on top and a screen, because all those hot cinders going out could start fires along the railroad, burn up the tracks or the trestles. And so the screen would force it to drop back into the stack there and be fired again. Here are the cars on the barge going up the lake. This is actually the Bellingham Lake Whatcom, but our operation was very nearly identical. And when you got to Seattle, you could sell it for $2 a ton as fuel for steamers. All of the steamboats in Puget Sound were running on coal at that time, and even some of the bigger boats out on the ocean. In San Francisco, you were selling it for $8 a ton, so it definitely was worthwhile. Of course, inflation has changed prices over the years as we go along in history. Once our San Francisco companies took over, they had money and finances, and so they brought this little portage engine for the link between Lake Union and the docks, and it named it after the company president or executive, Mr. Bodie, at that time. Very fancy little engine. Each time a new one arrived in Seattle, schools let out, people stopped work, and they all went down and got free rides on the new railroad with the brand new train. They were excited. We were now a great industrial city on the move. Seattle was coming of age. They were selling stock because Tacoma and the Great Northern Railroad had chosen Tacoma as a terminus for the Intercontinental Railroad. Great disappointment, frustration, and anger in Seattle. We were going to be the end of the line for the whole nation. So the citizens got together, organized, sold their own stock, and it wasn't enough, but they had picnics, and people volunteered. They came out for volunteer work parties to clear the railroad grade along the Duwamish River. That didn't last too long, and finally Chinese laborers took over and did most of the really hard work. Here we are with the railroad finally reaching the docks in Seattle. You can see the engine coming across with loaded cars. And it's going to a square rig sailing ship. Again, this is very early, 1878. And you notice Seattle is not very big at that time, probably only around 300 or 400 people. And it was said that the Newcastle mines had almost that many people living out here. Newcastle was the second largest town in King County at that time. Here are the pilings going across the tide flats. Today, this is where the Mariners baseball stadium and the Seahawks football stadium are both located right there. Another view of the docks. You notice they're high in order to dump the coal into wooden bunkers or storage containers, and then each one had a chute that could be lowered and drop the coal directly into the holds of the ships. So actually a big industrial operation. You can imagine it took some money to build a dock and a bunker system like this in the 1890s. Then they went to iron-held ships, and they actually had 4 of them going about 2 weeks at a time, back and forth to San Francisco. And even bigger ships by 1900, and you notice the cars on the main line coming down from the mines was much bigger at that time also. 1909, we had the first World's Fair on the West Coast, the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition. We were really excited. We were going to open up the whole Pacific Rim to trade. And Yukon had discovered gold, and so everybody was excited about growth and development in this area. And the state mining inspector, in this brochure for the fair, there was a whole mining building erected with equipment. But his report said in 1908 we produced $2,119,000 worth of coal profit, and 19 mines were in operation. And the U.S. government Bureau of Navigation said that Puget Sound was the third greatest coaling port in all of the United States, only after Baltimore and New York at that time, in 1909. Pretty impressive. What made it possible for us was the construction of these two immense wooden trusses across the May Creek Valley. Trains can only run on a relatively level slope. They can't go down and back up a huge valley. So the one on the left was narrow gauge, where the rails are only 3 feet apart. And now we're converting to standard gauge, which is much more like 48 to 50 inches. I think Russ probably knows. 52 inches?
4 feet 8.5.
4, 8.5. It's a lot. Much bigger cars. And again, these were really high. At that time, the report said 138 feet tall and over 1,000 feet long. And if you look very closely, you can see a gentleman standing on each one of these horizontal supports. So if he's 6 feet tall, this section has to be like 20 feet tall. And there's a guy on each one of them. So May Creek trestles. When they finally got rickety and collapsed at the end, they took the beams and used them to construct the Columbia River Dam.
Excuse me,
In the late 30s.
where did they cross May Creek, roughly?
There is a trail running down to that area and an interpretive sign there, and then it goes across towards that school at the top of the hill there.
It's just outside of our housing development, so it's where Windtree is.
Windtree?
Windtree housing.
Okay, yeah, it kind of goes at an angle, it's not straight. At the end of the line, up here, just a mile from where we are today, in Cold Creek Park, this is what was there. It's a sawmill here, empty cars waiting to be loaded with coal, a boiler house with a stack that's heating up the coal and creating steam to run all the engines, and then these very tall bunkers going up the hill for the little coal cars to come out from the mines, dump the coal in, and get it sorted and put in divisions. So again, a big, major industrial operation right where we are, right between the two parks. Later, it expanded to 3 smokestacks, a bigger operation. Now we've got trees covering up the bunkers, and the steam is created here. The creek is in a wooden box in a flume under the buildings, so they have a reservoir of water for their boilers. And the steam is created and piped up to a high and dry building, a generator house up here that generates electricity with dynamics to run, again, all the equipment on direct current electricity. Here are the bunkers, again, very tall, probably on the order of 80 to 100 feet up the slope. Little cars coming in, dumping the coal, getting it sorted here, stored in bunkers, and then dropped into the big coal cars. And you notice there are 3 sets of tracks down here now. Where the valley was skinny, it went down to 1 track. Where it widened out, they would have 3 parallel tracks. And on the roof, there's a whole line of barrels. Water barrels, that was the fire department. This picture was taken from the top of the bunkers looking upstream into what is today Cougar Mountain Park and Red Mountain right in this area. There's a white saloon above the sawmill here. Here's a saloon. Here's a lot of smoke up in the area of the Bagley mine. And now this white building is the Ford Slope mine operation. The little tracks are coming back with the little cars to the bunkers right here. Downtown on the docks in Seattle, now they've been enlarged, and they have this tremendous elevator hoist, which I think helps dump the coal in much larger coal cars and the iron hull ships. Coal was removed from the seam by drilling and blasting because it's squashed in there between the sandstone layers very tightly. So you had to drill into it. We have 2 drills right up here. One is called a breast drill because you put it right against your chest, and you have to crank this all the way into the coal seam. The other one is smaller, and And initially, they were using black powder charges that they created themselves in newspaper and black cannon powder. This was very early days, 1860s. Here, they're working a brand new drill. It's still hand cranked, but you notice it's stabilized with a jack and wooden blocks between the ceiling, the roof, and the footwall down here below. And they just opened up the hole, and this gentleman is placing the charge into the hole, which will go back into the seam. The scaler is in front of a big long hoe to pull away any loose rock that's fallen down from below. And most of our accidents out here were actually rock fall, where it came down on your head. As the coal tends to break up as it's exposed to air, it loosens and fractures and can crack and collapse. So you needed wooden props to hold up the roof in the mines. Here we are at the bunkers, where they're picking and screening the coal as it comes out of the cars. They have to fracture it in sizes that are marketable and get rid of petrified wood, salt water, clamshells, wash away any of the clay or mud that comes out with the coal. And so lump coal had the highest value for industries. They could handle big chunks. Then the standard coal for households was egg or nut coal, about the size of a walnut or a chicken egg. And the next size down was pea coal. Imagine lima beans or green peas on your dinner plate. That was good for heating and also for feeding boilers. And then finally, the very small stuff is called buckwheat coal, about the size of a rice grain. And that was used right on site, again, to run those little steam engines and boilers. We had at that time, there had been strikes, and the company had brought in black miners from Missouri. I counted 11 in his picture. You notice almost everybody has a whale all wrapped on their head. And I counted, I think, 3 young boys. This guy's got a whip over his shoulder, so he's a mule skinner. And another one over here, and another one over here. So all ages, some very old, some quite young. Multiple races, 14 different nationalities. Once you're underground, you got to trust and count on the guy next to you to do things properly. So they learned to cooperate very quickly. We needed more wood than almost any other mine on the West Coast because you had fracturing rock. So they needed wood to make all the buildings, create houses for the miners' families, and the company bought up land and actually ran 3 different sawmills in succession as they moved around to different localities. And here the log is being skidded out on smaller logs set across the trail. So that makes it a skid road with logs pulled out by horses. This happens to be on the 4th of July, and that's why the American flag is there. Here we are at the entrance to the Bagley mine, which went straight into the Cougar Mountain Hill. And it's right next to the trail today. If you go out there, you'll find a metal pipe that vents gases just before you turn and cross the creek to the port slope. So going right into the hill and under Cougar Mountain for almost 2 miles, a water level tunnel, just tilted just enough so any water in the tunnel drains out the front. And you notice by now we've been electrified. We've got an overhead wire, 250 volts, exposed, not insulated. And you have electric trucks or haulage motors that are very heavy and powered by electric motors, carbide lamp in front. And since the cars are loaded and they all have their equipment, I'm sure this was posed for the California company executives to see what their crew and their mine looked like. You notice they've got picks and shovels and lunch pails. The gentleman on the left here has a saw. He's cutting those props to fit the size of the tunnel that they're working in. And again, on the roof of the air fan house, you have a row of water barrels, the fire department. The board slope is just getting started over here in this area. And this is where Ford is developed now, and they're hauling out coal. Notice the size of these chunks. That's pretty impressive. Nice, clean, bright, compact coal. And the hillside's been logged because they needed timber for all their construction. The Coal Creek Valley, when it approaches Lakemont up here, the big curve, gets very skinny. So how do you get your engine turned around to go back to Seattle? You had to back up almost a quarter mile, and they cut a side bank in the hill into a semicircle and mounted a cement pad to balance this turntable on. And it was balanced so well, it ran on wheels on the outer edge, but it was balanced so well that they called them Armstrong turntables, because two guys with strong arms could push it around and turn it 90 degrees. The legend is that the grade school kids who had their schoolhouse just on the hill up above, would come down at recess or after school, and this became their merry-go-round. Again, just like Seattle, when we finally got the rails out here, there was cause for great celebration, and Seattle organized trips with passenger cars to come out and see the largest industry the area had. In fact, in 1880, President Rutherford B. Hayes and General Tecumseh Sherman came out to the West Coast. The first thing Seattle did was put him on a train and take him out to show him the largest local industry, which was the coal mines at Newcastle. So very important. Extensive schedule with lots of different trains, but basically 2 stops at Newcastle, coming at 7 in the evening and leaving at 7 in the morning the next day, and 12 at lunchtime, and then sent back again with a full load of cars. So twice a day. I think the 10 o'clock run was on Sundays only. But that made it a 1-hour trip to get into Seattle. With traffic the way it is today, we have a hard time matching that. And it was a real godsend for the families. They could go into town on the train and buy clothing, see the sights in Seattle, and not feel like they were so isolated in the middle of nowhere. Tragedy, disaster, fire in the number 3. So our coal mine directly under the big curve down there on Lake Boulevard caught fire in 1894. And it burned all of the equipment, melted the rails and the steel and the buildings up above that we saw earlier. They diverted Coal Creek into the shaft, but could not put it out. So after about a week and a half, they finally decided, let's close it all up. We'll have to go back to the west and start a new mine at Old Newcastle at the other end of the golf course, which is what they did. So Old Crook Creek Mine is the one that caught fire. It's right here. And the main smoke went down 5 levels, all the way down 5 levels, almost 1,200 feet into the ground. But it caught fire and can no longer be used. These are square mile sections of land, and so they went back to the west. Here's Lake Warren. And Old Newcastle Village was right here, so they started a slope here and kept working the 3 and the 4 and the 2 levels. But you notice they stopped because earthquakes and again ground movement had shifted the land, and so they ran smack into a rock wall. The coal just plain stopped. And so that's called a fault, a geological fault. And they had to stop and then go back again to the east and start that Bagley mine and then the Ford mine, which became the largest of all, because they then were advanced enough they could do crosscuts, rock tunnels through the earth to the next coal seam. So from the Muldoon, they could intercept the Bagley and the number 3 by going north, and even go to the May Creek and the Jones by going south. They had 11 of those electric tugs working underground at the Fordsville. That meant that Coal Creek was the center of operations. And so the Coal Creek Hotel, for mining executives and new families, suddenly became the Newcastle Hotel. The U.S. Post Office moved out here in 1918 and occupied this part of the building. And so we now have the second town of Newcastle located in Coal Creek. And because it's 1918 and we're in the middle of World War I, there is so much demand for coal that they're constantly adding new miners and trying to produce as much as they possibly can. And they started putting families in tent camps up the side of the hill into the Cougar Mountain Park area today. This is Lakemont Boulevard in 1919. So Dirt Road is right where Lakemont Boulevard is today. Finntown was here, where all the Finnish miners wanted to settle together as an ethnic group. And over here on this side is the hotel, and the long building here is the company store. And you notice in front there's an open-sided wagon. 1919, that's the school bus for all the kids. Trucks and cars took a long time to get to the West Coast, and they were expensive. And here's this wonderful map that Milt Swanson preserved for us, which shows all of the houses, these rectangles with numbers. And you notice 3 parallel roads up in Cougar Mountain Park, all labeled Red Town because the company color of paint happened to be red. If you had enough money to buy your own house, you painted it any color other than red, and that became Rainbow Town on the other side. White Town was for company executives, and as we said, Finntown was up here to the north. The black buildings, these are places where we find concrete foundations today. So we can verify that the map is accurate, and we know we are at the bunkers. And we know the railroad here got skinny and went to one line and then narrow pinch point, and then spread out to 3 parallel tracks right here. The hotel had a U shape. They added 2 wings to the west. The store was that long, narrow rectangle. The Finnish Miners Hall, I think, was up here. And the single miners bunkhouse was here. The Ford Slope wash house was right here. And the steam plant was down in this area. So a major industrial operation at the height of World War I and on up into 1928, right out here in Newcastle. And again, Lake Mount Boulevard would be right here. Now, today, it cuts across the store and makes a curve in this area. The store made deliveries, again, by horse wagons. Horses were really valuable and important. Frankly, the droppings probably provided a lot of fertilizer for home gardens. Downtown Seattle, they were using horse carts, again, in the 1920s to deliver coal to factories and large apartments and hotels and even local homes. Some of the older folks that I meet say, oh yeah, my first job when I was 8 or 10 years old was to shovel coal into that boiler first thing every morning, warm up the house. We had a cable line, just like San Francisco. We had cable cars back in 1893, but they needed an engine to drive the motor to pull that cable. This is at Leshai, and here's the powerhouse with the smokestack, and here are the cable cars that went on up the hill and down into downtown Seattle. Out in Newcastle, something that was very important to the wives was Sunday school every Sunday, whether the minister could come out from Seattle or not. The church was interdenominational, different religions would come out on different weekends, but the kids always had Sunday school and dressed in their best. And maybe the ladies can tell us why they had these huge hair bows. I think this might be 1890 fashion. The 2 kids on the right here, this is Ani and Nelma Peltola, the Finnish daughters, twins of Elias and Quentin. And their family had a farm right where we're standing. So these 2 kids grew up right here in the dairy farm. Most of the miners had a very rudimentary house called board and batten. So you had 2 vertical boards and then a narrow strip of wood covering the gap so the wind and the rain didn't make it through the gap between the boards. They weren't insulated, and the inside furnishing was all up to the individual family. And you notice here they've got a lot of trellis work, probably for pole beans or rose arbor. And the picket fence, my guess is they're trying to contain very valuable chickens for the dinner table. Most houses this size would have held 6 to 8 people. Families were large, and if they weren't, the woman might have brought in single miners to board to eat their meals here at the house. They had a brass band, which was the primary entertainment in town for weddings and funerals and picnics and baseball games. We were very proud of it all. This is a English tradition, and probably the company bought the larger instruments and provided the uniforms. They also formed a public school in 1914 with 4 classrooms, 2 grades to each level, and industrial arts in the basement for the guys, and home economics for the girls. The turntable is down the hill behind this building, but a very modern schoolhouse. So religion in schools and proper order is very important to the families. And the company made a point of trying to hire family miners from Europe. They knew that would make it a much more stable community. Here we've got pupils for the school, and again, here the matching pinafores I think belong to Audie and Nelma. And the teacher here with the white, and again, large hair bows. You notice knee-length dresses and high-top boots, because you're still walking around in muddy, dirty streets with work projects. You notice that the guys have coverall pants, and most of them have tweed caps, just like their fathers. The town had its own baseball team, and games with other mining towns were real affairs. That was a cause for celebration. And often, your young sons would not be able to find work here in Newcastle, but might go to Black Diamond or Ravensdale and come back for the ball game. So it was family reunions, big picnics, and Milt and Fred Rounds both said that the company might hire a guy not because he was necessarily a good miner, but because he was a good baseball player. 1909, here we got that picture of the crew ready to go into the Bagney Tunnel. Look at all the empty cars, and my guess is we've got 40 to 60 guys here and 5 of the electric tugs, all lined up ready to go in. Here's the bunkhouse for the single miners and the end part of Rainbow Town. Here's another picture, Rainbow Town over here, the bunkhouse. At that time, they had a wooden bridge across the canyon instead of the road that we have today. And I like showing this mainly because of all the stacks of wooden timbers, props to hold up the roof in the mines. That was very important. And now we have a modernized version of the bunkers over here at the far right. Underground, now we've been electrified. Here's that hot wire and the electrical tugs, the angled coal seam, and we think all the wood batting there is because that room was mined out and they didn't want any loose rock rolling down and blocking the tracks. Once you're down 200 feet or 1,000 feet, you've got to get your coal car now loaded with 2 tons of coal out of that shaft and up that long slope. So you need a very long cable and you need a very strong steam engine. And we have a 3-foot diameter cylinder here, direct drive to the reel of cable. This is the up line, the other side is the down line, and it has another motor over here behind the operator. So the empty cars going down help counterweight the full cars coming up. But this was the hoist house in Cougar Mountain Park. And I want you to pay attention to the bolts that are holding the engine right there. They'll show up later on. Here's the steam house. It's venting steam from each of those cylinders, one on the right, one on the left. The cable is coming out the ropeway and into the mine, which is underneath all of this. The empty cars are lined up to go in this way. Go down, get loaded, come out, and here are the full cars lined up and ready to go to the bunkers. And you notice again that log trees, 5 wood. And the funny little tunnel here made out of cement is actually a flume, a pipe made out of cement to take Coal Creek under all of this so it doesn't flood and wash out in the rainy season. Here's the wash house in the foreground and a car. We're not sure if it's a Ford or not. It was called the Ford Slope because the company president's name was Ford. But I kind of think the miners liked Henry Ford's new automobile that they could dream about buying, a Ford car. You notice the steam house has now expanded to 8 stacks. So we're obviously in the middle of a war when there's a lot of demand for coal. And the boiler house has been expanded now with a new lift for that powdered coal. The empty line goes in here, and the full line of tracks comes out here. And this young fellow's face, I think, says it all. Exhaustion and covered with soot. Oil lamp on his head. leather whip over his shoulders. He was obviously a mule skinner. But coal mining has never been an easy job. You're underground in a very dangerous situation. There are collapses, there are fires, there are explosions, and it's hard physical labor. Initially 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day, and finally because of the unions they got to an 8-hour day, and the 6-day week got reduced again. But because of those strikes, which often were national, our guys, part of the union, had to go off work whether they wanted to or not. And so they wound up needing food, and the union would supply sacks of potatoes here in the 1920s. Elias Hintonen, laying down here in the foreground, is the Finnish miner. Being president of the union, he knew he probably was not going to get rehired. And so he had saved just enough money to come up here where we are, because he acquired this land, and now in 2 months' time he built a house and started a dairy farm to supply everybody with milk and make a living and raise Bonnie and Elma in a house right here where we are today. So let's take a break now. There are refreshments over here on the side. We've got all kinds of tools. Bob Boyd is here, our surveyor, to talk about that. And we'll resume in about 10 minutes or so. He came up here and took over the farm when Grandpa retired. When they got to retirement age, they contacted the city of Bellevue and said, we want this to remain natural and be a park, but we'll sell it to you at a discount if you guarantee that. So that's why we have this park. It happens to be named Lewis Creek because our good old Philip Lewis on the survey party went back to Seattle and staked a claim on the land in 1863. And the creek got his name. So that's why it's Lewis Creek Park. And I'm sorry I'm remiss, I didn't thank Kaylee, our park ranger here. Thanks for putting up with us, opening the building, and she'll have to clean up all this stuff. I put away the chairs. And also, we are filming this now, so if you're nervous about being on the camera, don't turn around. We'll shut off and edit out anybody that's concerned about being photographed. And let's try to hold questions till the end this time, so we can get done around 4 o'clock. So 1928, the Great White Fleet of the American Navy was going around the world to show the flag of American industrial power, and they fired the engines with coal. So coal was a power source for factories, railroads, and steamships. Here we got factories heating coal to basically warm up steam to be sent to all the hotels and businesses in downtown Seattle, and also to fire brick, to take clay from Cougar Mountain and turn it into brick. And so boilers and coal heat was really important. It also made Seattle a major industrial area. Now we were making boilers for steamships as well as for steam engines on the river. And in 1929, the company finally said, we got all this small particle coal, the buckwheat stuff. Why are we throwing that away? Let's try to compact it together with coal tar and make briquettes. And we can sell bricks of coal. So they had a 300-foot long conveyor belt down here at the shores of Lake Washington, fairly close to Kuwa Park today. And we're making thousands of bricks of coal every year. Some of the kids that swim down there say you can still find once in a while find a coal brick underwater. So recycling, 1928. At this time in the 20s, oil had been discovered and was starting to be produced and available. And it was easier to transport, burned cleaner, and was becoming a real competitor to coal. And so the company had a major marketing campaign. Mike Hiddlecoffer found this ad for us from the Pacific Coast Coal Company. Ideal home fuels, Black Diamond briquettes, and Newcastle coal, which brings a smile to every household. The standard of heating value for half a century. So for 50 years, we've been producing coal and sending it into Seattle and heating buildings and houses. We even found a little cartoon that said, if your mother-in-law's been in the house too long, make it too hot by burning Newcastle coal. Oops, wrong button. During the hot summers, people didn't have a need to heat houses, and so the demand for coal went way down, and that meant the miners were working fewer and fewer days. A lot of them became farmers and loggers or fishermen during the summer months. But coal was gradually being replaced by fuel oil. The company even started delivering coal direct to buildings and factories with their own trucks as a way of saving money, take out the middleman. And through the 1950s, coal was actually fueling steam trains. This is down in Auburn, loads of logs ready to go, lots of electricity, but you're still firing trains across the nation with coal. The problem that we know now is that all of this coal dust and ash and smoke was bad for our lungs. And even worse, the monoxide and carbon dioxide, that invisible gas, was going up into the stratosphere and creating an umbrella that keeps the heat in on our planet and causing climate change or global warming. So we're not at all advocating heating with coal or even necessarily natural gas. We should go to photocells and wind and hydraulic energy. We've been very fortunate in this state to have hydraulic energy. But I think this program is important because to honor the cultural history that we have, the courage that it took these people from Europe to come across the Atlantic Ocean and all the way across the United States or on a ship through the Panama Canal and up the Pacific Ocean to come to a forested land where there was nothing else around. They didn't speak the language, and they were working underground in the dark all day. On the other hand, they weren't rocking around on the ocean and in danger of falling overboard and drowning, or being in a wet forest, soaking wet with trees that could fall on their heads. So they knew coal mining. They felt good about being employed and working at Newcastle. 1950, we got now the mines still have headlamps that are electrified with heavy batteries on their hips. Again, lunch pails and big smiles because it's payday. And in the background here, this is very important. They had a tag board. Each miner had a little brass tag with his initials or his numbers on it. And he hung it up there to indicate I'm working in this tunnel or I'm out safe at the end of the day. And that was very important for the companies to know we got everybody out safe. That's still happening in all the mines. And the B&R company was one locally, where the big Pacific Coast Coal Company, their bunkers burned in 1929, and they decided fuel oil's overtaking us, we can't afford to rebuild, we're out. So the local miners of Lima and Rubatino formed a company of their own, leased the rights to mine those same tunnels, and they knew they could expand them and go further and rob the pillars of coal that had been left to hold the roof up. That was called retreat mining. You pull out the far pillar and the ground above would gradually collapse. And you work your way back to the entrance again. So retreat mining. In Cougar Mountain Park, opposite the Ford Slope, we now have this interpretive sign talking about all the mining and showing a lot of the same pictures we've shown here. And in the center is a photograph of these guys at the knuckle, where the flat railroad tips and starts going down the 40-degree slope. And you can see the cable that goes out to the hoist house to pull the cars out of the mine. This is the development crew that are going down and establishing the lines underground. So when you're out in the park today in front of that sign, you're standing right where these guys were 100 years ago. And here they are on the cover of our new book. And you can see the industrial area that was the Ford Mine Complex. Here's the hoist house with steam coming out both sides for both cylinders. The boiler plant with 8 smokestacks because this is World War I time period. The machine shop, the office building, the wash house, the doctor's office up on the hill, and the beginning of residential buildings up on Red Town. And here's the air shaft over here with vents in and out. There's still a cement block there stamped 1920. This is the year 2024. So we've got a marker out there in the woods. It's over a century old to remind us of what is going on out here. And it also reminds us that nature has had 50 years in many places and 100 years in some places to recover. And that's why we have these wonderful lush parks to enjoy. But there is a problem. The old shafts can reopen, and these were found in 1985. Fred Rounds, who is still up here, was showing them where they were. And Skelly and Lloyd, the engineering firm, found 40 different open holes in the Cougar Mountain area where they were proposing to have a big regional park. So over several years, they did some enclosures for each of those holes. At the same time, the Issaquah Alps Trails Club and Harvey Manning were promoting the establishment of that park and Coal Creek Park as well. And doing it by having return to Newcastle events right down there in the Red Town parking lot today with entertainment. And the miners and their families would come back and share their stories, and it was a reunion for them. They had a great deal of fun. Milt Swanson is the guy on the left here. Bill hosted this program and the artifacts to Milt. Fred Rounds is up here on the right. Virtually all of these folks have passed away now. Milt's sister, Ruth, I think, is 102 this year. So there's just one or two left that know the complete story. But thank goodness they've saved a lot of stuff, and we have these artifacts here today. Randy Revelle, who was running for King County Executive at the time, made establishment of the parks his cornerstone of his campaign, and here he's announcing the acquisition of Upper Coal Creek to become a park. So thank goodness now we've got a public park out here on Coal Creek, which is also a salmon stream, and a really wonderful, lush, cool place to go on hot summer days.
What year was that?
This is, I don't know exactly.
93.
Sounds about right, yeah.
What year was that again?
93.
94.
Here's Harvey, who was a guidebook author for trails for the mountaineers, and helped establish the North Cascades National Park. But he lived on Cougar Mountain, just over the side of the hill here, and he walked up here every day and met neighbors and met the loggers, and really campaigned to establish a park up here. So we owe our thanks to Harvey and Milt and Randy Revelle. The events attracted 3,000 to 5,000 people. They had long display tables with photographs. And here's the last one in the 15th in 1997. And here are Milt's artifacts. Some of them are out on the table today. At that time, there was still an opening to the western air shaft for the Ford slope. And so the kids are looking over the side here. It was mostly full of water at that time, 1984. But within 2 weeks, it all drained out. And suddenly we started finding dead birds and animals in the entrance. They had succumbed to carbon monoxide gas, which is heavier than the outside air and in pockets in old places like this. And so that was a real danger. And we knew OSM had to help us close these shafts up. Additionally, after 100 years, the timbers started to rot and collapse, and the roof starts to break away and fall in. So it'd be very dangerous to go underground in these tunnels. The miners knew that. They had their own mine rescue crew with breathing apparatus, goggles, and special lamps, lots of equipment. Today, the nearest mine rescue crew is in Montana. So if you go down to one of these holes, you're on your own. You're not going to get out. Yoasan used this map, which is very helpful. Each of the black dots represents one of those holes that needed attention, needed to be closed up. And you notice there are 3 of them right in Lakemont Boulevard on the big curve. That's why the bridge is being constructed out there today. They said they encountered 3 of the holes when they were drilling, and the holes are now full of cement. So it solved the problem, and we're going to have a bridge with a little bit larger road, a little more more safer situation. Notice the shafts, the seams run northwest to southeast, and they're in a narrow band, pretty close together, about 800 or 900 feet across here. This is Fred showing OSM one of the open shafts. And in the year 2000, even after OSM had done their closures, we had a major collapse in the Bagley. Golf course construction had cleared the land up on top, and through two successive 100-year storms had jumped over the road and drained down in and caused a plug in the spear shaft to collapse. So now we've got about a part worker up here. So it's about a 35, 40-foot diameter hole and easily that deep. You can't even see the bottom down here. So closing these up was important. Also, over the top of the Newcastle Hill, the Bagley seam was quite thick, and so the strain company in the 40s and 50s used a steam shovel to dig all the overburden away and then get at the coal and truck it on into Seattle. That made a big, long trench across the top of the hill, which was filled up with construction rubble from the city of Seattle, so old concrete, lumber, etc. But it's still soft and settling, and that's why the driving range for the Newcastle golf course is above this Bagley strip line on the Newcastle Hill. The way OSM approaches things now is to excavate down to solid rock, and then to put in a wire gratis that this plastic foam, which is very sticky and expands tremendously, can be poured in under pressure and heat. And then it forms a plug, and they do it layer by layer until they've got about a 20-foot thick plug of high-density foam. That makes it strong enough to support a cement plug that goes on top of it in a cone shape, so that if there's an earthquake, it just settles on down even tighter into the cork in the bottle of the cork in the bottle gets tighter. And then the pipe in the center is to help measure gases and mark the center of the hole for future reference. So when they're all done, this is what you got, a 3-foot tall pipe with about a 4-foot diameter brass plaque at the top. This is closure number Coal Creek number 342. So 342 closures in the western Washington area. And this was done in 2011. Today they're all GPS, so we have a reference to all the holes that we know about. And we do monitor them every year. A couple of them, Bob Jacobs and Tom Exton, who were acquiring property for King County, fought very hard to keep at least one open for viewing. And this is the one that's up by the clay pit on the number 4 airway. There's an interpretive sign next to it, done by the Boy Scout here, talking about air circulation, the need for fresh air in the mines, and the process of running fans and all the coal seams. And if you get your camera underneath the grate, you can see a wall of coal about 8 feet thick, a hard gray slate bottom that's usually got water dripping on it, making it very slippery. And then the overhead sandstone layers are strong enough to stay open all these years. The grade school kids have a great time chucking a rock in there, counting. 1,000 feet down. So you get 6 to 8 seconds of listening to that rock bounce down into the earth. Brave people to go into these mines. Here's a final diagram from OSM. You see the number 4 bed, then the number 3. This is working north to south. The 4, the 3, the May Creek, and the Bagley, and the Muldoon, and finally the Jones south end. So it's about an 8 or 9 foot wide band of coal activity right through the park. And the cross-hatching indicates areas that were even strip mined or worked above. So the ground is unsettled all through here. So it's very important when you're in the park to stay on the designated trails, which are primarily old road beds. And the miners knew where the shafts were, so that's where they put the roads. So it's safe if you stay on the trails. If you don't, there's a danger of ground collapse or a danger of toxic gases where you can suffocate. And we need to be honest with people and tell them there's a potential problem out there. Next to the Ford slope, we have this little coal car, kind of represents what the miners were filling. In the early days, you got paid by how many cars you could fill every day. Roughly two tons of coal in each car. You might do a couple in a day, you might do 4 if it's easy mining. They liked Newcastle because the coal was right there, and for the most part clean and soft enough to break up. Here's the exhibit at the Ford slope. And here's the photograph of the mine complex. Again, the steam plant, the boiler operation, machine shop, offices, wash house, air shaft up here. And across from the slope, going back to the south, you find these huge cement pylons or foundations. And you notice these little poke-up things along the top. These are the bolts that held that steam engine in place in the winch house. So this was the hoist house foundation right here. Harvey thought he found Mayan temple mounds out there. At that time, it was all surrounded by blackberries. Today, the beavers have made a dam, and so the valley itself is almost entirely flooded. And at the other end of the golf course, the Bima Rupatino had these wooden bunkers. They had a ramp coming up. They dumped the coal out of the trucks and into the bunkers down below. And then this would have chutes dumping the coal into trucks to take it on into Seattle. Most of that has gone away now. But Gary and Pam Lee owned property close by and saved equipment like this portable winch on rails that is used in the mines, probably again for retreat mining to pull those timbers out. And the city of Newcastle has this wonderful brick sculpture. Mara Smith carved green clay from Cougar Mountain at the brick plant and made this wonderful design before it was fired. So we have 2 panels that are about 6 by 8 foot out there at the Commons today. The brick plant used to be where the Commons apartment complexes are today. And we have 3 signs in front of it from the Newcastle Historical Group to explain about the coal mining that happened right there. Newcastle City now also is the owner of the Newcastle Cemetery at the south end of Lake Huron. And we have volunteer projects to help out clean this place up. This is William Lewis, who was killed in Newcastle, aged 40 years, gone but not forgotten. And many of the miners belong to fraternal organizations. This is the Independent Order of Oddfellows. And, oh gosh, I've already forgotten. They have a motto. Anybody know exactly what it means?
Oh, it's like faith, hope, and charity, Steve, or
That was
loyalty
my
and friendship.
mistake. It's, oh gosh. Fellowship, love, and truth. Fellowship, love, and truth. This is the Independent Order of Oddfellows, founded in the United States. And basically their guideline was to assist the distressed, bury the dead, and educate the orphans. So it was basically life insurance for the miners, and a guarantee that if they did die in the mines or were injured, their fellow miners would help support them and take care of their families when they were gone. So it was very important locally. And we do have now a volunteer group, and Bob Boyd over here has been surveying the cemetery to make a grid set up so we know exactly where all the plots were, and we're asking people to help us go out and actually find, probe for headstones like this that were found buried under basically brush and topsoil from the last 50 years or so. So again, this is Mr. Scott, and again, the fraternal organization killed at 28 years of age in the mines. We also have the Bima House, and I think we had that picture of it over there on the table. Pam Lee has made an agreement with the developer that this will be saved and preserved and move to the northwest corner of the property and become a historic park. So hopefully, a lot of these artifacts can be displayed in this building, and we can actually have a little miners museum in a miner's house. It was built, we think, around 1875. It's actually a King County landmark at this point. And just across the street from it is this old Newcastle slope with this funny-looking guy here. But you see the band of coal, the side wall, and cemented sandstone over the top, so solid that they really didn't even need any wood timbering here. This would make a great display for viewing. It does have a metal grate over it now, and so we're hopeful that in the future we can have a viewing point and clear this out for people to actually look at when they visit the museum. This is Joe Byman, the B party, the Byman Rubatino, in a car about in the Magellan Slope. That's the one at the very far west end of the golf course. And this is the tipple that Milt and his father built to bring the coal car up high, open the back gate, let the coal drop down into the bunker, and then go in through the chute to the waiting truck to be driven into Seattle. So Milt was a mechanic and a truck driver to be in our coal mines. He was taking coal to places like this in the old yard in Madison Street. It's not there anymore. But in Seattle, out at the university, there's still the smokestack for the boiler plant by the heck of the building. At Gasworks Park, there's still some of the old equipment where they would heat coal and drive out the methane gas. Seattle had gas lighting in the downtown buildings and hotels in the 1890s, even before Edison had his electric lamp. And they also had a major powerhouse right on the eastern shore of Lake Union. The coal could be brought in barges and electricity created for the whole town. So those things are still there to look at. And here's Milt at the air shaft right below his house. That hole in the ground is still there. There's an interpretive sign next to it, so you can go out with your kids and read the sign. You can go downstream and look at the waterfall. In Milt's backyard, behind the wire fence, are these brick pylons. These were the supports for the generator house. It was there. You can see at one time it was probably 6 times bigger than the little shack that's mounted there now. And then for Marymount Museum, we did a videotape. So there's a treasure box for school kids that can be checked out and show them coal scenes in the sandstone beds and creeks. And Bellevue now, in 2004, took over Operation Coal Creek Park and erected these kiosks. This one is right next to Lakemont Boulevard behind the fence. And talks about the hotel that was in the field right over here and has that map of the town. So you can see these things out in the park today. Down on the trail, which actually runs along the stream, is the railroad grade of that 1883 railroad. There are interpretive signs. This one talks about the bunkers and the flume timbers that were put in the creek to keep the water from getting down into the mines and also allow them to bridge over the top to run the railroad cars over to the top. And then the North Fork Falls is just next to that. In the wintertime here, it all freezes up. In the summer, you get this orange staining because there's so much iron still in the Primrose Tunnel, probably railroad tracks and equipment. There's an anaerobic bacteria that feeds on that and brings out the iron sediments and creates rust like this down the wall. This is interesting geology because at the bottom is strata of cemented sandstone going this way. This whole 20-foot bank is unsettled, unsorted cobblestones and clay and dirt, bulldozed here by a glacier from Canada. As the water runs over, it stains that. So, very recent geology, 18,000 years. Very old geology, 35 million years down at the bottom. And along the railroad grade, we found this foundation, which really puzzled Mike and I. It was about 8 foot by 16, but 1 foot thick walls, and again with bolts sticking out at the top. Why would they have this next to the railroad there at an angle? And then somebody found a really nice picture of lo and behold, here's an 8x16 shack right where that foundation is. And there are rails coming up the hill and a cable. So this had to be a winch house to pull the cars up to the upper level to go on out to the mines past the bunkers. You can see the creek here, framed up with wood in the flume, and the large coal cars ready to go on into Seattle and the bunkers here. So all our trail today is right where the cars are. Here's the flume timbers that are down there still, 100 years now. 1 foot square, probably 30 feet long. If they're wet all the time, they really don't rot. So it's been a good historic thing to look at. And interesting enough, those timbers and the wall is right here today still. This was a press tour in 1926. The company was trying to show all of the journalists in the state. We had a going concern out here. We had opened up the Primrose mine and we were going to continue mining coal. Unfortunately, in 1929, just 3 years later, the bunkers burned to the ground. And that pretty much sealed the end of big coal mining out here. And here's Milt in his museum with some of the same artifacts we've been showing today. So we owe him a whole lot of things. And I'll skip a couple things just to show you what's happening at the big curve. They're drilling 4-foot diameter holes, putting in metal rebar rods 20 to 30 feet down, and going to have basically pilings, cement pilings, supporting the road embankment there. They've already excavated down about 25 feet with these, and then they're drilling with these 4-foot diameter augers. So here you can see the old road levels up here, the new levels down here for bridge construction. So the abutment will be here, and the bridge will actually be about 50 feet across up in this area. Hopefully by midsummer this year. Pretty ambitious. We'll see. So we'll break here and end the program, and Mike and Bob and I will be here to answer questions. Russ has books, and thank you for coming.